Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. So I wanted to talk big picture a little bit about our targeting rule, and as Chuck said, kind of a mid-season update. So the first thing I would say is the rule is working as the rules makers wanted it to, and by that I mean, and as we all know, the game's under attack, and we're getting more and more information about concussions and the impact, short term, long term, but there's a lot we still don't know. So the rule was intended to modify player behavior, change how coaches interact with their players and modify the player behavior on the field. And what may be surprising to you is that the overall targeting fouls are down this year over last year, even with the increased emphasis that we have. And, some of the numbers nationally in FBS, there's been 52 targeting fouls, and in the SEC, there's been 14. And I think one of the things we've really tried to emphasize as we've talked to players is really three things. Heads-up tackling, see what you hit. Number two, lower your target. And finally, the third thing is wrap up. Avoid the launch and wrap up. We've seen the physiology of the body in a wrap-up tackle is very different than a launch-type play. And we've actually seen players' reactions change on these type hits. Last year, a lot of times we'd have a big hit like this, and the player would be chest bumping and high-fiving his teammates. Now it's almost, hands on the helmet or whatever. So I think the players are getting it, and we still have a long way to go. And in fact, this past weekend is a perfect example. We had our highest number of targeting fouls that we've had on any weekend this past weekend. We had 4. And, compared to just 2 weeks ago, we had 0 for the weekend. And I even got questions, did we have a special emphasis this week? Are we redoubling, targeting? And we didn't. We're trying to officiate consistently throughout the season. And as everybody knows, it's a national point of emphasis in our mechanics around targeting. So, and really, if you look back into this week's 4 fouls, 2 were just absolute textbook targeting. 1 was in the gray area, but clearly by rule, it was a targeting foul. And then we had 1 that was properly overturned. And I think that's where we probably get the most concerns. And I would tell you, even our commissioner has serious reservations about the penalty philosophy around targeting fouls when they're overturned. And so, he and I have talked. He's challenged me, and together, we're going to work with the rules committee to revisit, the penalty, if a disqualification is overturned for targeting. And, so the net of that is, I think we've got some work to do still. But if we now go into our replay booth, which evaluates every one of these plays, if we allow them to not only review the disqualification but the penalty itself, we get close to that bright line of, are we officiating from the booth, judgment calls from the booth? But maybe this is an area we need to talk about that with the rules committee and really flesh it out and really work through. So, as I say, our guys are having a great year. This is a very tough rule to call. Sometimes these hits at full speed, happen very fast, and our guys have to work to continue to get better and better so they can make the call. And I expect our guys to be very good with this rule. And, even in full speed, it's easy when we go frame by frame, but we've got to be good when this thing is in full speed and make the proper call. But if we do err, and as we all know, not a Steve Shaw scenario, but the NCAA rule says when in question, it is a foul. But when we have a miss, expect IR, the instant replay guys, to then use the frame by frame to overturn it if that's appropriate. So, summing it up, we're making progress. The high hits are down year over year. But obviously, we have a long way to go to continue to be excellent around this, and clearly, I think there's some opportunity to work within the rules to make it better.
With that, if you have any questions for Steve, please press *1, and we'll begin with Chip Towers, the AJC.
Yeah, Steve, appreciate it. You answered a lot of the questions that I had. One of them, I'm wondering on, you said there were 14 targeting calls so far in the SEC. Do you know what number of those have resulted in ejections or overturns?
Yes, good question. So of our 14 fouls, we have had 6 overturns that as we say in this, it overturned the disqualification.
Right, but you also indicated there is sentiment, league-wide or NCAA-wide, to be able to waive that penalty when the replay shows that a targeting foul did not happen.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure I can gauge nationally just yet, but I can tell you the commissioner, his sentiment is there, and I've talked to some of the other coordinators, and I think here is the not concern, but here's the thing the Rules Committee is going to have to flesh out. Sometimes a targeting foul is only a targeting foul, and if you overturn it, there really isn't any foul on the play, or shouldn't have been. But sometimes you can have, for example, you can have roughing the passer and targeting. And that's the thing we've got to talk through, or let's say you had a personal foul, unnecessary roughness, and targeting. Do we want replay to kind of cross over that line to say, okay, we're going to overturn the disqualification, but we still think it was roughing the passer? And we've never had them, weigh in on judgment around, roughing the passer, holding, chop blocks, pass interference. And that would be a huge leap within our replay. So I think that's where we've got to have great discussion and see if we can find a way to meet what I want to try to do would be, if it's a targeting foul only, let's not penalize 15 yards. But I think we've got to have some very thorough discussion to make sure that we're not totally officiating from the replay booth.
Yeah, and if I could follow up on that, obviously targeting is a point of emphasis, but are referees in the SEC being encouraged to call targeting rather than a late hit or a roughing the passer? I mean, isn't that just as easy to call as it is to, if you put the targeting label on it, the penalty is obviously more severe.
Yeah, and we're teaching them to evaluate the hit, and if it meets the rule book requirements of targeting, it's targeting. If it doesn't, then we obviously don't want targeting. And like you say, then it could be a dead ball personal foul or just a roughing the passer. So there is no emphasis in one conference or the other over, let's just throw everything into the targeting category. Absolutely not. And we do a lot of film work with our guys, where we show really as many plays as we can get our hands on. My belief is the best way to teach officials, if you're talking holding or whatever the foul is, show 5, 6 in a row that says, this is holding, this is what we want, this is holding, this is what we want. And then, likewise, this is not holding, we don't want this foul, and really work through it that way. So we're doing that with targeting, but it's not a brand new rule. I mean, it's a rule we've had for the last few years, but now, obviously, the penalty phase of it has garnered so much attention in the rule itself.
Next, we'll go to Daniel Uthman of USA Today.
You sort of are touching on this a little bit already, but I wondered, during the week away from Saturdays, how much time is spent with your officials reviewing the calls, maybe especially the ones that got overturned, just trying to sort of get all the officials on the same page in terms of calling it consistently?
It's a great question. And we really start on Sunday evening with our officials. So I have a call with each of our referees, and we're together as a group. So we talk through any issues from the game, unusual plays, things of note. But then we actually evaluate. We do a film grade for each official. So 7 officials in each crew, and every play, each official gets evaluated, not only on their judgment, but on their mechanics, their movement, and that sort of thing. And that is returned back to them by Wednesday evening, so they can then look at their film with their film critique and go back through the game. And then we expect that crew to be together Friday night, assuming a Saturday game. They're required to be in the city where they work on Friday night, and then they go back through their entire game film with each individual's video review and work through it as a crew. In addition to that, we have a training tape that I put together every week that every crew together looks at. And it reviews the calls of the previous week, and not only just for the judgment accuracy, but mechanics, philosophy, really all around the officiating capabilities. And then one other thing we do, we have all of our instant replay guys together on a call on Tuesday, and we review every play that they buzz in on, that they stop the game for review, whether it's targeting or not. And we can actually, the technology allows us to link them together. The instant replay official that was in the booth will actually talk through his play, and by the hundredth of a second, we can all get linked up in video, and then he walks through, here was my money shot, here's why I overturned it, or here's why I didn't. And then we debate that and talk about it and make sure we're on the same page. So from my standpoint, it is very important that we have consistency. But no 2 hits are always exactly alike, but we're really working hard to get to that point.
Do you feel like it has moved into a more consistent direction as the season's going on? Have you seen improvement in terms of the consistency of the call? That's kind of hard to really sort of every movement, every hit is different, but have you seen sort of a movement toward that?
We have, and not just in the SEC. We had a call a couple weeks back with all of the Division I coordinators to kind of talk through, and so nailing this from philosophy standpoint and what we're looking at, very similar to what we talk to the players about. We're talking to our replay guys on what to look for, what are indicators, but many of these still will ultimately come down to a judgment from that replay booth. And what we're trying to do is get as much of the individualistic judgment out and really try to all judge from the same perspective, if you will. And it's a work in progress. I won't tell you we're absolutely there yet nationally, but I'm telling you, we're making good progress. And even with, the attention that this thing has brought, when you look at it, like I said, nationally, 52 fouls in all of the FBS games and 14 fouls in the SEC, this is a huge focus, but, we've certainly had a lot more than 14 plays in our games, so we still have to officiate the game.
Next, we have Emerson of the Macon Telegraph.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for doing this. I hope I'm not being repetitive, but since we're obviously kind of stuck with the 15-yard penalty sticking on an initial targeting call, even if it's overturned on review, what are you telling your officials about that? Is there a need to be restrained, if that's the right word, or what do you tell them about that? Well,
we talk to them in terms of, we stay within the guidelines of the NCAA rules and our CCA mechanics. And, whether I like it or not, the rule book says when in question it's a foul. And so, I've heard, the term, err on the side of safety. I don't want us to err. I want to make sure we're clear on this call. We can't guess. We can't think it might have been. We've got to see it and know that it's a foul before we put the marker on the ground. But like I said, these things happen in a split second, and so when in question, the book says put the marker on the ground. And I think I think the intent of the rules makers was on target for that. I think as as we said earlier, if we can make some progress on the penalty phase of this, then maybe this thing then kind of comes together and gets our game where we want it. And I'll make this comment, and this is just a personal comment from the standpoint of targeting. I think a lot of fans say, boy, y'all are trying to ruin the game, and I don't think the Rules Committee had any intent of ruining the game. It's a very physical game. It will always be a physical game. But there is a relatively new phenomenon on this targeting. If you go back and watch some of the great games from the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, you didn't see this launch into a player like you see it today. And I don't know what's caused it. I don't know if it's the Sports Center highlight mentality, the great equipment that we have for helmets, and it makes you feel indestructible. But it's a relatively new phenomenon, and I think if we can take that type play out of the game, and I think that's where the rules makers are, get that launch to the head or those big head hits out of the game, then it'll still be a great game, and it will keep the physicality of our game.
Next is Dwayne Rankin of the Montgomery Advertiser.
Yes, my question is, when initially enforcing the rule and putting the 15-yard penalty, what was the logic and the thought of, okay, well, if it's overturned, to still penalize the team 15 yards? I mean, it looks like to me if you're going to overturn it, that meant that the call, it wasn't targeting. So what was the initial thought of keeping the 15-yard penalty even after the call is overturned?
From the rules, from the Rules Committee perspective, the concern was, do we now push that replay toward this bright line of evaluating judgment components in a foul? And you're exactly right on. If a foul is either a targeting or nothing, then that seems very straightforward, that if you take the targeting away and the disqualification away, the foul would go away as well. But some of these plays, if you go back, and I wish I'd have done this. I haven't. Of the 52 plays nationally in our 14, some of them include, like I said earlier, roughing the passer and targeting. Some would include, a personal foul, unnecessary roughness, and targeting. And those are the ones that if we just said the foul goes away completely, well, then how do you deal with, well, what if it was roughing the passer and a targeting? And then if you say, well, let the replay guy make that decision, that clearly crosses that line of, okay, now we got him in there making views on a judgment call that up to now, we've never done. So I think that's where the focus of the conversation would be. I don't think rules makers, the intent wasn't to, disadvantage a team, if one was overturned, but they didn't want replay going into that second set of replays. So I think that's the equation that we have to solve going forward on how we want replay and how far we want them to go. And is there, better ways to be able to classify these fouls where if it was a targeting only, then, yeah, let's take away not only the disqualification but the 15-yard penalty. But I want to be crystal clear, that's not something that will change in season. I think that'll be, wrestled through by the Rules Committee in the off-season.
Thanks.
And can I make one final comment? And I know I say this at times, and people just kind of let it wash, but just so you know, the only people that get a vote on the Rules Committee are coaches. Officials make recommendations. We give feedback. We tell, based on questions, can we officiate this and that sort of thing. But it is coaches only that make the final changes in our rules.
Next we'll go to Mark Weiser, the Athens Banner-Herald.
Hey, Steve. You may have touched on this a little bit, but James Franklin at Vanderbilt said heading into the season that we all knew very clearly that any call that was in the gray area was going to be called. Is that a fair characterization, you think?
Well, the rule says when in question it's a foul. The challenge that I have is to get our guys to a point where that what is in question gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But I will tell you that is a significant challenge when you look at the speed of some of these hits. So and I think I would say I was going to say almost all. I think all of our coaches are in favor of player safety and understand the need for a rule like this. I think there would be great debate among the coaches of how do we tweak it to make it better, to fit the game, and to change that player behavior. And so I think that's the challenge that's going to be in this thing going forward is keep the game great, take these hits out, and ensure that our officials, can be as near perfect as they possibly can be.